awards last weekend, and it was great. I still have jet lag, but it was really fun.
Fantastic. Now remind me again where you are. I see that. Are you in Pennsylvania? Where do you live?
I'm about an hour west of Philadelphia.
Okay, now what's that Hawks on your door behind you?
Oh, that's St. Joe's. That's where I went to college.
Oh.
Yeah. And can you see my ancient lacrosse stick up there too?
Yeah, above the door. Yeah, right on. I actually just met St. Joe's, like right up there near Haverford and all that place, Villanova.
Yeah.
I made my first trip to there last year. I was working at Friend Central, and a woman who came to our Trainers Institute, who had coached softball at Haverford, and got the job at St. Joe's. And and so I was like, hey, I'm in town. I just realized St. Joe's was right near here. So I went by campus, and it was great because it was the fall and they were having this come to Jesus moment with the team. They had huge issues with the team. But I hadn't got back with it. But I was like, I didn't know where St. Joe's was. I heard about it. I never knew it was all in that little area there.
It's all close by. That's why it was fun. I loved going to school where there were so many other schools right there.
Yeah.
We did a lot of things together. Like, it's funny. I'm in college mode now. Hold on one second. I'm switching my headphones. I'm in college mode now because I have both of my daughters going off to college next year.
Oh, wow. Where are they going?
My oldest is going to James Madison in Virginia.
I'm a Duke.
Yeah,
Go Duke.
That's right. I saw that on your thing. Yeah. Is that where you went for undergrad?
That's where I went for grad school.
Okay.
I almost went there for undergrad, and I realized it was one of those things where I knew that I would get some more playing time at Radford.
Yeah.
I was transferring in as a junior, and I just wanted to be on the court. And so JMU and VCU were the other two, and then I chose Radford because I knew I'd get more PT.
Got it. Now, what did you play? Did you play volleyball?
Yeah, believe it or not, I thought I'd play. That's my whole stick. I thought I'd play D3 basketball, but I went up at a junior college, which kind of changed my trajectory for what happened. But I was in a car with somebody just 2 days ago. My partner's daughter's friend. We're taking them to basketball, and I said, "How old's your sister?" She said, "A senior." And I said, "Where's she going to school next year?" She's like, "JMU." And I'm like, "Dude."
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes. Dude.
And where's your other one going?
So she's not sure yet. She has to decide by tomorrow.
You have two seniors. Are they twins?
No, my oldest daughter was, she graduated last year. So she's actually a freshman in college, and she was going to take a trip to South Africa for the year. It was a January through December, like a leadership missions mishmash of a lot of different things. It was in Jeffreys Bay, South Africa. So she decided to stay home until she left for South Africa, and then the government shutdown did not allow her to have a visa. So she was stuck here. Yeah. So she decided just to finish out the year at community college, and now she's transferring in as a sophomore to JMU.
Oh, so they're both going to JMU.
Possibly. Yes, possibly. We will let you know tomorrow.
Fantastic. It's such a great area. My nephew, actually, which is really funny. They grew up in Southern Maryland. My sister got divorced. They moved to West Virginia, blah, blah. And they would have spent some time in Harrisonburg. As a buddy who runs the rec department, I used to, of course, always talk about it. And then he moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, I don't know, 5 years ago. And then he just got married and they had a baby, and they're moving back to Harrisonburg because that's where her family is. And they got property on the land. So I'm really excited because it's only 2 hours from here versus driving, 5 to 6 hours down. And it's just, and they got married in Harrisonburg last June. And it was up on the hill, so cool. Like her brother's house. It's just such a great area.
It's so pretty. Pretty. And they just drove down again this weekend, and my husband drove them down, and he just said, "Oh my gosh, like, you forget how beautiful it is this time of year too, when like the trees are blooming and the flowers are coming out." He said it's like breathtaking just driving down.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, did we have this conversation? So you know Christy Morgan?
I do. So actually, I don't know her. She doesn't know me. I know her. She went to my high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she was like, I forget what year she graduated. Do you know what year she graduated?
No. What high school was that?
Methacton High School in Collegeville, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So she was like the most famous alumni. I played field hockey as well. And so when we were, she's got like Hall of Fame there. She was the first Olympic field hockey player to ever come out of my high school. So she used to come back. My coach coached her as well. And she'd bring her back in the summer. Like she'd come back and visit her family and run little clinics. And oh my gosh, we thought she was like God,
Right.
I actually have like Christy Morgan I have a pair of like green Chuck Taylors that she signed, and we had all these field hockey balls. So
I love it.
And so when I was down there with my daughter, I guess it was last year, for like, a tour or something, the field hockey team was practicing, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's Christy Morgan. That's so cool.
Oh, well, next time you go down, when you see her, you have to go and say, hey, and introduce yourself.
And wear my Chuck Taylors.
And wear your Chuck Taylors. Absolutely. All right, here's the last thing. We'll transition. The day I graduated, it's funny that we're talking about how beautiful it is down there, and it's May. I graduated, whatever it was, 20 years ago from there, 25 years ago, and it was May something, and it started snowing. It was on a football field. And then it got cloudy. It got cloudy and overcast. I think it was going to rain, and Sting started blowing, and the flags on the stage.
Oh my god!
And then it started snowing in May. It was unreal.
No. Down there too.
Down there too. Yeah, it was windy.
Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you had last week with the awards and all that stuff. You still enjoying your PGA gig?
I am. Yeah, it's getting tougher because there's still only one of me, and every chapter wants a lot of trainers. So it's getting really busy, and it's.
So is that right? What's funny is that when I got on, all of a sudden I go, oh my gosh, I don't really even know what Kelly does. So I look and I was like, oh, national lead trainer, and I'm like, when you talk about certifying, the only reason I even knew to call you, Kelly, to be honest, because I haven't got certified in something in so long.
I'm sure.
I don't know who does it. I was like, I don't know. I know Kelly runs something like big, and so you do. So what does difference in Ruben do?
So I do all the new people. My role is new trainer development. So everybody new that comes on board that wants to be a trainer, they fill out. It's a big process now. They have to fill out an application, and then they have
to. Thing. That's what I was like.
Yeah, they do a lot. They do a lot because when they get to me, I want to just work on facilitation skills. I want to just assume they already know the content. They've read the book. I'm not here to teach them the principles.
Yeah.
So it makes it a lot nicer for me because they do all that pre-work. And then when they come to me, it's more of like, tell me a story about a time when, you noticed a player with an empty emotional tank and how you stop, basically I'm trying to say, come up with an activity to get the coaches engaged that centers around roots or whatever.
Right.
So that's my role across the whole country. But then I'm also the lead trainer for Philadelphia and DC area. So since you're DC, if any trainers need to be certified in other workshops, Sonia sends it to me. I send out all the resources. And then if you live in like California, Ruben will certify you. If you live in Chicago, Joe would certify you, or
I got
it all split up.
Okay. That makes sense.
So you're stuck with me because you're DC.
Yay. Well, I'm glad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's fun. It's good to touch base.
Yeah.
And I heard you got to meet Chris Bolin. Did he come out with you?
Yeah. And it was funny is I had met Chris at the Cap City Little League. I did a coach workshop, I don't know, 2 months ago. And whoever the guy was, I can't remember his name. I left my adapter there, my dongle, and I have never got back. But
I hate those things.
His friend was, and he kept talking to me about this guy, Chris, on email, but I didn't even know who this guy was. So I didn't know the friend that he was referring to and why. And so Chris shows up at this, and he's sort of like a participant. But after, I guess it's because he was interested in training. So he was there, and I kind of met him, but I didn't really know where he was in the process. But it was a really nice guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
he's a good guy. He went out to co-facilitate for the first time this weekend with Monica Livingston, and he did one section. She said, I think it was like it was for this. No, it wasn't for this workshop. Was it for this? It might have been for this workshop. No, it was. It was this workshop, and he did just the section on mistakes. And she said he talked for like 35 minutes and didn't ask any questions, didn't get them thinking, didn't like have them role playing anything, just talked for 35 minutes.
Oh no.
And I was like, how could he do that after going through all the training, all the Google Hangouts, all the stuff we talk about? So, and she said the problem was he talked about himself for 35 minutes. So
that's probably, well, and you know what's weird because I'm somebody who is a storyteller, and it's funny even reading this, like, but I'm constantly in the, I facilitate for a full-time job. So, you're constantly regular being aware of what you do, and, you get it. So, you know what your weaknesses are and you adapt. But the workshops are designed that, for scenario building and different facilitation, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
But it's funny you say that because just the day that he was with the coaches, he raised his hands a few times. And I remember thinking, oh, this is his guy. And I had that moment where I'm like, you're not part of the cat. Like, I kind of want you. And when he was saying it, it was from the I perspective.
Yes.
Of what I tried. And so it was a little bit of managing. So it's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, it's tough because Monica's like, he's got all the charisma. He's got a presence. He's got a great voice. He knows the material. Well, she said he didn't know it as well as he could, but just the all about him and what he does at his school. And this is how it works for my players. And she said, not once did he turn it over to the coaches in the room and say, you know, what do you struggle with this? Or what do you do when players, you know, don't let go of mistakes? And what are these mistakes versus this mistakes? And so it was a shame because Monica said she was going to do Caring Climate at the end and she didn't even have time because he just kept going and going and going. And I said, you could have pulled the plug on him. She's like, I know, but I didn't want to step on his toes. And I wasn't sure.
That's a hard thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So
well, let's
I say
use
sometimes,
that as a launch for this, because what's really funny is I was looking, so I watched the thing. I didn't watch yours. Yeah, that's gonna be the next thing I do, because I listened to the thing yesterday and watched it, which was interesting because I didn't realize till midway through that it was sort of this project managers. And so I was listening to the way the different voices, sometimes they were coach voices and sometimes they were, how would I sell this workshop?
Oh, yeah.
So it was a really interesting perspective. It was actually really good.
Yeah.
So, you know, so I went through and listened to all that. And then this morning I was looking through, I had a hard time downloading it for whatever reason. I couldn't download it. It kept saying it wasn't accessible. And then it did. So now this morning I was looking at the notes section, and it was great because I saw one of the first things. It's so funny that you brought this up too, because it's one of the first things was, be careful here not to jump the gun and bring in the principles too soon.
Right.
And which is kind of what you're talking about, right? This whole thing of one of my weaknesses. And I think it's one of those things that I believe arises, you know, sort of the weakness arises from a strength. It's like, this is what I do full time. And I got to this point where it was like, I can't separate my life is hard from PCA because I've been in this industry my whole life. So when I think about coaching, or even the work that I've done for Strive or PCA for 20 years, and then coaching, facilitating. So, you know, it gets to the point where, you know, you kind of like the art of facilitation, right? Is to be able to bring in stories. And sometimes it's like, wait a minute, was this an example? It naturally came out. Or when, you know, this is what it really does, Kelly, is when somebody says something, it triggers something, they go with it.
Yes.
I will oftentimes go to validate them. You're spot on, great point. And when you get to blah, 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 you'll see it ties into this. Because I have a hard time not acknowledging that they've kind of hit the mark. So it was really interesting to read this. And I'd like to actually hear you speak to that about, and how important it was for me to read that and go and see if you can avoid that. So it was just this great moment that ties into what you're saying about, you know, the power in not doing that. Because even though I'm thinking that it's because I'm validating them and tying it into what I know is 2 slides from now, like, what's the balance in doing that? So
I think it's hard too, because this workshop, and you might have heard this when you went, I haven't watched that video in a while, but this workshop is meant to be for coaches that have already done Double Goal Coach 1 or developing competitors, and they haven't. A lot of them have not. So this is what I was just talking to Monica about yesterday, because she said this happens a lot where she'll do the mastery workshop or she'll do positive motivation workshop, and she'll say, okay, now I know, you know, how many of you have been to the Double Goal Coach 1 workshop or developing competitors? And like 3 hands will go up out of a room of 40.
Right.
And so she kind of asked about that and said, why is this happening so much? And the partner said, you know, we buy however many workshops, like 5 workshops in a year. And so we put all the dates out to the coaches and we tell them that they have to make 2 of them. So it's not necessarily that they do the first one and then the second one. They might do the 3rd one and the 4th one, or they might do the 4th one and the 5th one. So she said, it's been really hard. We put out multiple workshops to give them choices, but then some of them will choose like, whoa, this sounds like a better one to me. Mastery coaching for peak performance.
Right.
So Monica was asking that yesterday, like, how do you just continue on with the workshop when they don't know the basic 3 principles?
Right.
And, you know, I said, it is kind of a balance, but you also have to understand that this workshop in and of itself is valuable, even if they don't know filling emotional tanks and they don't know honoring the game.
Absolutely.
It's not like those are not a prerequisite for this workshop. And that's sort of how we set them up, so that there's a lot of value in this. Like, as trainers, we think, oh my gosh, this is sequential. They have to know that one first and then this one, but it's not really. I mean, anybody can use workshop and mastery.
I've always known that. And they actually say that yesterday on the video. So it's actually really interesting, because the stuff that you and Monica were talking about was interesting to hear these people talk about this thing that for 20 years I've experienced, right? You go in even as a trainer and people are like, well, we didn't do this one, or just so you know, half the people have done this and half haven't, or, you know, do we have to have this? And you're like, no, they all stand alone. So that's become a common thing. You know, this can stand alone. Or is this, even building on what you're saying, is you can also have people that are in the room and they go, half of them raise their hands, and you ask them to give an example of something. And just like a kid, they have no recollection of anything.
Right.
So this whole idea is just none, which would totally make sense, right? I heard it one time a year ago and I don't know. I didn't try
Yeah.
anything. So it's all new to them. So it definitely is a balancing act. But so you tell me this process. Take me through.
So basically, I just kind of find out from you, like if you'd like me to kind of go through and throw out some ideas or things that have gone well, I can. If you have any specific questions, it really depends on what you'd like to get out of this. Like if you, I mean, obviously you know what you're doing. So if you went through the workshop and you're like, I've got the content, I understand it, but can you explain this part for me a little bit more, or how you would do this part? That's fine. Or if you want to just, we can just zip through it and just see if you have any questions. That's fine too. Totally
Well, let's do this, Kelly, because I like to hear different things. I have one or two things and I'll know them when they come up. But if you want to just go through, and if you kind of go, Pam, this is what really, like for me, because I heard everybody's takeaways yesterday about the slides that was on it. Like I said, I haven't watched yours yet. I might get it from there. But if you go, and this is mine. So for me, my understanding, I'll tell you my base understanding, right, is this is, again, it's in general for people who have already gone through one. It's the deep dive. It's a deep dive of Elm. Yes. And it's all about the maximizing effort, maximizing learning, or maximizing mistakes as opportunities for growth. And it kind of closes with the caring climate piece, which is really the umbrella of it all. And
the only reason, just to let you know, the only reason we didn't put it first is because we didn't want this workshop to seem soft and cuddly.
Yeah, I get
that's really it. Because it's sold as peak performance, and if somebody sees caring climate first, they're going to be like, "Oh my gosh, here we go again." So that's why we put caring climate last. But you're right; it is the umbrella that goes over it all.
Right, or the ties in it. And the other thing that talk about, which was interesting too, was even and it was funny because it was obviously the first time that even maybe Ruben or Joe or a couple people had come back and were having this conversation, because one of the trainers or PMs had asked about substituting some of the pictures, because like, again, I'll be doing this for a high school coach, and if they see a third grader in a uniform, what does that mean? And they're talking about subbing pictures in, and or even like Molly's. Ruben's like, I don't know that I would show, you have to make your judgment if I would show Molly's video to a high school coach. So, all those, but what I would really like to hear, Kelly, is when we get to the tools part of each one, there's a couple issues, like or a couple questions, like when it comes to goal setting, and they're talking about, we kind of really missed the mark. Just here languaging on some of my questions I have. So when you guys are referring to missing the mark on, or short, I forget the languaging. Why don't you roll with it, and then I will, I'll bring up my things as we go along.
Sounds good. So the coolest thing about this workshop is that it's about performance. So you're going to have everyone's attention right off the bat. There's no, it's not like Double Goal Coach 1 where they're like, I buy into Elm, but I'm not really into the emotional tank part. Like everybody wants to perform better. So I always sort of frame it as, this part of peak performance. And again, this is right in your wheelhouse, but it's, so much of it is the mental game. And we talk about the athletes being in the zone and being, focused. But as coaches, we also have to reframe the way we think. So this workshop is intended to get you to just kind of rethink the things that you reward, the things you emphasize, the way you respond to kids, your athletes and your players. And you're going to see changes immediately just based on the same situation and how you respond to it. So that's sort of how I sort of open it up. And, again, the idea that mastery focus is not something that we invented. It's something that, sports psychologists and the best athletes in the world, these are the things that they have focused on to become so successful. And some have said that the idea, even when we get to mistakes, the difference between a successful athlete and an athlete that struggles is based 100% around how they deal with failure and mistakes. So we're going to touch on that as well. So again, the reflections, I always get them up and talking and moving. The nice thing about this is it has a lot of opportunities to get them thinking and talking. So I was telling the trainer I worked with yesterday, just read the room, and there's a lot of opportunities to have them match up with. And I said, I'd like to just say, when you group people, try to do it a different way every time. So it could be based on the question. It could be something that, and I don't know if you're, where are you doing? If you're doing it at a high school or a youth organization.
I'm not doing it yet. I wanted to. I don't like it on my mind, because I signed up to offer when Sony was out of town, and you're like, oh, you're not done that. I'm like, oh, I got to get that on my.
Right. So it's great to be able to see, like, if you're most of the time it's for high school. So you have the opportunity to group high school coaches that don't usually coach together. So I might say, find people from a different sport than you. Or if you're there with your coaching staff, I might say, okay, here's a good opportunity to get with your staff to talk about this. So just kind of reading the scenarios and seeing what would be best. I like to just get the coaches up and thinking right off the bat, like right out of the gate. So this idea of a time when your team was performing really well and what allowed them to perform so well, I might have them get up and do like a 4 corners, or do a timeline based on how many years they've been coaching, or I like to have them, you might have seen too, I do like a contest to see which side of the room can get themselves in alphabetical order or birthday order or whatever order, they just some kind of a competition. And then once they're up, you can have them turn to the person next to them or whatever, just to get the blood flowing a little bit.
Yep.
So the first part obviously is just getting them in the zone. And that's what we're talking about in this whole workshop is how do you get your athletes as a team and as individuals to perform at their best. And I just stress that there's going to be two different ways we look at this because there's a difference between team and individuals. So again, this review part here, the core principles, I would not spend a ton of time on it. It's just, this is the background. This is our culture at PCA. We're developing double goal coaches who are striving to win and teach life lessons. These are the 3 principles, but today we're just going to focus on this one, which is mastery. So I give them like a little 1 minute, filling the emotional tank has to do with the connection piece. How are your teams getting, connecting together, relying on each other, really building that teamwork up, and honoring the game is the piece we call integrity. It's, are the kids, did you set a strong culture in place based on moral values and strong ethics that your team all knows and are all very clear with? So it's not, there's no black and white areas. So we're going to be talking about mastery, which is focusing on performance. So again, yeah. So with this slide, Pam, I mean, this is the same slide as you would do for double goal coach 1.
Yep.
So I don't know what exercise you do for double goal coach 1 when you go over this, but I like to, again, once I have I like to split the room in the beginning and just have them talk and think. So what I'll do is I will have like the left-hand side of the room. You guys are the scoreboard focused, win at all cost coaches. In your mind, what is success? And I ask them and they'll say, when you win, when you beat your time, when you do effort. Okay, great. Based on these things, and I'll pull up the slide that says results, comparison with others, mistakes are not okay. And then I'll say, okay, this side of the room, you guys are going to be the mastery focused coaches. You're coaching in a mastery climate. We're focusing on the controllables. We're focusing on effort, what they've learned, and how we handle mistakes. We want to use mistakes as opportunities. So this is sort of how I set it up in the room. And then I'll put a scenario out there and I'll say, okay, let's say it's basketball. I'll just pick a sport. It's halftime and your team is losing by a very slim margin. They haven't been playing up to their potential. And you've got that famous halftime speech where you have to motivate them to get back into the game and play harder. So I'll take someone from the scoreboard side of the room and I'll say, can I have a volunteer to be coach? And then, I'll pick whoever it is. And I'll say, okay, you've got 30 seconds to coach up your team using a scoreboard, win at all cost mentality. I want you to be intense. I want you to be loud. And I want you to 30 seconds, motivate your team to get back in that game and play better. Go. And they'll just start ranting, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're down. You're not passing the ball. You're not talking. What are you thinking? And I've done this like 24 times. And every time it's hilarious because they're so good at it.
I think it was Keenan, who I don't think of it, did it on the video, I think. Is it Keenan?
It's great. It might have been. Yeah, it's just a great exercise. And then you just stop and you look at the, because the coaches that he's yelling at are supposed to be the players that are standing there in line. And I'll just stop and, I'll clap for them. But then I'll say, okay, players, what are you going to do when you go back in? How do you feel right now? So I talk about physically, how do you feel? And they're like, well, I feel afraid. I was just yelled at. I'm kind of defensive here. I'm kind of, anxious. And then I'll say, okay, what are you going to do when you go back in? And they'll say, try not to screw up. And I'll think, okay, that's your performance mentality right now, is that you're scared, nervous, anxious, and you don't want to screw up. Now, let's go over here to this side. You're going to be, and I pick a volunteer, whoever it is, you're going to be the coach that's going to coach the same halftime speech. The team is still down by a slim margin. You need to give them a 30-second halftime speech to motivate them to go out in the second half and perform at their best. However, you're going to be focusing on their effort. You're going to be focusing on what they've learned, and that you're going to help them get over the mistakes by focusing them on the next play. So I want you to be truthful, specific. And then I say, I want you to be just as intense as he was or she was, because I don't want them to equate mastery with less intensity. But so I just say, okay, 30 seconds, go. And every single time, Pam, the coach will say, team, I love what you're doing. I love the communicating. You're hustling. There's a couple things we need to work on here. We've made a couple mistakes, but you know what? We're going to come back in the second half and we're going to, capitalize on those and whatever else. Like, I want you to communicate. I want you to pass the ball around. I want you to play tough defense, keep your feet moving. And they're, without me even telling them anything, they're like the perfect mastery focused coaches.
Right.
So then I say, stop, we clap. And then I'll ask those players that were just, the ones that the coaches talk to, and I'll say, okay, how do you feel emotionally, physically? And they'll say, I feel relaxed. I'm excited. I'm motivated. I'm pumped up, I'm excited. And then I'll say, okay, what are you going to do when you go back in the game? And they've heard it all. So they'll say, oh, we're going to pass the ball. We're going to move our feet. We're going to play better defense. We're going to communicate. So then you just stop for a minute and everybody's still standing in the room. And you just, the big, nugget question is, which team's going to perform better? The ones that are scared, anxious, fearful, and are going to go into the next game trying not to lose and not screw up, or the ones that are motivated, excited, pumped up, and they know exactly what they need to do. They need to communicate better, move their feet, and pass the ball. Who's going to perform better?
Yep.
And, regardless of what the scoreboard says now, and a lot of times that's like just kind of a quick activity at the very beginning of a workshop, and it just sets the tone, and it's visual. So they remember scoreboard versus mastery. And
I think I might do that one tonight. I've got just a DG2 one tonight, and always looking for something different. So I might do that tonight for the just introduction of the scoreboard definition. Which
it's really quick. I mean, I explained it longer than it takes. It doesn't take that long to do it, but It's just a big aha moment for coaches. And then sometimes I'll even say, how many of you have been this coach over here? The scoreboard focus. How many of you have heard yourself say that? How many of you would rather be this coach over here? So there's your first, and I'd say there's your first homework assignment. Try to get a little closer to this. Nobody's perfect, but we're going to try to get a little closer. So anyway, that's kind of my biggest opening to this workshop, just to have the coaches realize that they can change the way they coach, which can affect the behavior of the athletes and the performance. So the first part, we're talking about Elm Tree. Again, some might remember it, some might not. But we're talking about effort, learning, and mistakes. The first one we're going to go for is effort. So again, it's all, asking the coaches to draw on their experience. And we're going to be talking about, we want the maximum effort of our players during games and during practice. And, sometimes I might say, where do your players play harder? Where do they give more effort at practice or games? And it's really funny when I ask that question, you'll get a bunch of different answers. Like some sports will say, oh, it's games, my kids play harder. And other sports will say, oh no, practice, they play harder. So it's just an interesting question to ask. So again, it's based around a scenario. Coach thinks you might have, the scenario idea is that you can have great skills and drills, but if your athletes aren't motivated, they're not going to work hard. So this one I like to do with similar sport coaches if they can, because I think there's a big difference between giving effort in basketball and giving effort in swimming, or effort in volleyball versus effort in track. So I like to kind of put them in groups according to the type of sport it is, like if it's an individual sport or a team sport for the scenario, but you can, do whatever you want. I just find it works out pretty well. And then, I always put them in groups and I have them share out who's the spokesperson. I always say the person whose, birthday is closest to today or whatever. Or sometimes I'll even say, if they're in like a little group and they're talking about a scenario, I'll say, okay, point to the spokesperson. Everybody just points to the loudest person. So see what they come up with and, see what kind of things that they do. And a lot of times I was telling this new trainer yesterday, I said, they'll come up with better ideas than you do, which you know, and they'll come up with ideas that work for their team, and that, coaches are taking notes and scribbling all around. So, again, the takeaways, and I always am real clear about this workshop is going to be a little bit of theory. It's going to be a little bit of challenging you to think about how you handle it. And then every time you see a slide that says takeaways, those are concrete tools that you can use and bring to your team tomorrow. And there's also a handout. I don't know if you saw the handout for this, but we have a 2-page handout that has every single tool on it. So if I'm not going to spend the time to go into detail about every single tool, but they're all there. And I also mentioned too, and I'll bring this up at the end, that we have a really good resource page, a DevZone website, where they can find any tool. They just type in the tool and they can find a lot of information about it. So, so here's what we're talking about. We're talking about what you can do to make effort a habit so that the kids are motivated to work hard all the time. And so a lot of the coaches will bring up things like, the toolkit, those little yellow flags, they'll bring those up when you are, when you're asking around the room. So, I wouldn't repeat them, but competition and fun, they all say fun, they all say timing. But the idea at practice is to understand what motivates them. And, so this sometimes can open up a can of worms, but I like to open up cans of worms at workshops. I enjoy it. Because some will say, my kids give best effort when they know they're going to have to run for punishment if they don't do it, or if I make them do 50 push-ups if they don't do something. And then I'll just let that sit for a minute and say, anybody have a problem with that? And then you'll get somebody else to go, well, I don't think you should punish your kids with running. I once had a track coach who, the football coach, said that he keeps punishing his kids with running. And then the track coach said, the part that sucks about that is I want to recruit your football players to be on my track team, but they hate to run.
Right.
And this was like all in the same room. And I thought, I mean, I've used that before, like you don't want kids to hate running, but it was so great having like the football coach and the track coach be head to head. And the track coach is like, stop punishing your kids with running. It's killing my program.
Exactly.
So I thought that was so funny. I was like, thank you for track coaches everywhere. And he was just talking about like, this would be so good if your kids ran track. Do you know the mental toughness they would get? Do you know what they, and he's like, you're killing them. Stop making them run. He's like, he actually said the one time, yeah, imagine if there was a team based on push-ups. Nobody would want to be on that team.
Right.
He's like, it's the same for running.
Exactly.
I thought that was funny. So again, this is the shift from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation too. And so again, we don't like dictate this on the slide, but we are talking about as a coach, a lot of times we might start with extrinsic motivation and try to start with positive motivation instead of negative consequences. We're sort of programmed that negativity gets results, and I always assume, Pam, again, you guys have all heard from the first workshop. We know that positivity works better than negativity. It builds, it broadens, it allows the players to feel like they're confident enough to take risks. Yet still, for some reason, we've got that idea in our head that we have to punish kids to get them to perform. And
all right, so I got a question for you on this one. So
yeah.
All the stuff is totally makes sense to me. The I've done a lot of Daniel Pink stuff on our our autonomy, mastery, and purpose motivation. So I'd love to hear you speak to and I played it again yesterday, and I wasn't quite sure about what the emphasis for intrinsic is, sort of how. So if intrinsic motivation again is self, is that I guess I would ask the question sort of what's the punchline? What's the succinct punchline for them to say? So how do you get it? Is it by default that if a kid feels like they're concentrating on things that are within their circle of control, or they have some ownership of something? Is there something at this point that's come out that says they're more likely to be intrinsically motivated because of this environment? So you guys are, or
I mean that's the idea.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the idea, is that they like all of these things that we're going to be talking about are going to foster intrinsic motivation.
Okay.
So, I mean, we also think about negativity is a purely extrinsic motivator.
Right. Okay.
It's a negative extrinsic
You're
motivator.
clearly defining the intrinsic and extrinsic for them and drawing them back to that this model is designed to promote intrinsic motivation, if you will.
True. Yep.
Got it. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's why, like, even a targeted symbolic reward, I mean, it's just a little example, but that is something that, eventually they're not, and I always joke too, sometimes I'll say, how many of you still expect to get an M&M when you go to the bathroom? We don't, at some point you get over that.
Right.
And, even projecting joy, celebrating progress, these are all things that coaches do. And it's, it's not something that the kids will come to expect every time, but if it's part of the culture, they'll want to perform best because they know that this is the culture that you expect. So it's the idea of making effort a habit, not the rare occasion that gets rewarded. It's on this team, you give 100%. And if you're a coach that has players that are not giving 100%, we're going to get to that in a second. Then we need to rethink our strategy here.
Yep. Got it.
So the effort versus outcome goals, again, if you want to show that, you can, depending on the ages. I think it's a good video because it shows a coach and how they speak to the players. So, if you feel comfortable doing that, I think that's fine. So this is for effort during competitions. And this, again, it's a lot. I think this is a lot of words, Pam, and we can get into the trap of talking too much sometimes. But I also think that before you kind of show it up on the screen, to just say, why would any player not give 100% effort during a game? Give me some reasons why. Because I think a lot of coaches just expect, like, of course, it's the game. It's game time. It's time to give all your effort. But we all have had athletes that don't. And what's our biggest tool that we use as coaches to motivate them? Can you think of what that would be? Like, what do most coaches during a game use to motivate a player to go out and play harder? If you don't, what'll I do?
Right.
If you don't, I'm going to take you out. Yeah, that's it. It's playing time. So for most coaches, that's the only tool in your pocket. That's the only carrot that you're waving over their head, that if you don't perform, if you don't play hard, I'm going to take you out of the game. Again, that's a negative consequence. But if they know that playing their hardest in the game will reap a reward, and they actually understand the reward beyond just, we're going to score points, we're going to do better, we're going to win this game, they have to understand, because of the culture of your team, that we all give 100% effort. You're part of this team. It's going to help you be stronger, faster, resilient, build grit, mental toughness. Like, these are all the skills that we want the kids to know so that when they get in the game, there's no question. Of course, they're going to give 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this isn't, I always say this is so simple, but it's not easy. And it's not something you build overnight.
Yep.
And then if you have coaches in the room, and I always do this, if you have coaches in the room that have been coaching for, because when I do the lineups in the beginning of my workshop, I can visually see who's been coaching for 20 years and who's been coaching for 2. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll call on those veteran coaches and I'll say, what have you learned about this? Like, I really tap into their expertise, because when you've been coaching for 30 years, 30 plus years, you've got experience. And even if it's not directly PCA related, they're going to tell you the same things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, this is what I have to do, So, yeah. So let's keep going on. Again, Brad Stevens' video is great. Focus on the process, not the results. And these are the things that the veteran coaches will tell you. And I always laugh. I always say, why do coaches that have been coaching for 30 or 40 years have so much great wisdom? Right. Like, why is it that I've never trained you as a PCA trainer, but you have just the right things to say. And I once had a guy say, because if it didn't work, we would have been fired 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, probably a good point.
Well, it's so true. They're the number of times that what comes out of somebody's mouth, probably mine included, is just this. Well, I can answer how I would have done it when I first started coaching and how I do it now. Like the number of people that say that, it's like, well, what I would have done was that same thing. I learned along the way, or, or learned what matters, or reprioritize. And most of them are more aligned with what this says.
Yes, because they know it works, because the scoreboard only gets you so far. You've got that season where you've graduated all your seniors and you're 0-6 going into the season, the first half of the season. How the heck are you going to keep them motivated for the second half if all you focus on is the scoreboard? There's absolutely no way. So they realize it just doesn't work. I love to take the veteran coaches in the very beginning and just, give them a round of applause. Thank you for coaching. Thank you for, your commitment. And then say, okay, if you had advice for your first year coaching self, what would it be? I mean, those are some priceless wisdom droppers, of like, wow. And you've got the new coaches in the front of the room that are like writing this down frantically. And they all say, I wish I had more fun. I wish I spent more time getting to know the kids. I wish I, enjoyed it more and showed the kids how much I didn't care about the score as much as I did, things like that. So again, this self-reflection piece, Pam, is exactly that. It's, what do you project when you're coaching? And I always say, what if we took, there's parents all over the place that are videotaping. Everybody's got their phone and they're videotaping every play of their kid. But what would you look like if a parent videotaped you for the whole game? So what would you be projecting as a coach against a very strong opponent? What would you be projecting when your team falls behind? And sometimes I'll get them up and ask them to actually just pretend, nonverbal here. What do you look like when you're coaching against a really strong opponent and you're losing? And I have them like, they'll go like this. So they'll be like frustrated. And I'll say, what about when your team falls behind? What do you look like? How do you feel? What about crunch time? What about a loss? So they, you could see everybody just tense, and then I'll say, how do you look like when your team is winning and playing beautiful and in the zone? And everybody's shoulders go down and they're just like, whew. I'm like, wow, imagine if you could coach like that when your team is losing or at crunch time or when they're falling behind. What would the difference be? And then it's one of those like, that's a good point, So that's what that is. So how to maximize effort, the slide that says how to maximize effort in practices and competitions. Again, this is just kind of the wrap up. At practice, we want to make it a habit. And at competitions, we want to focus on the small wins and the process and what you can control. That's really the key.
Yep.
And again, I love the last line. Sometimes trainers skip over this last line. On successful teams, coaches share the responsibility for the effort. I usually have somebody in the room read that. And I just ask them, what does that mean to you? And again, it's a really quick line, but there's a lot of times when people have probably been coached by coaches that say, you're not playing hard, you're not playing defense, you're not watching the ball, or you're not passing the ball, or whatever it is. And just think about what that does to the players. It's telling them that it's shaming them. It's saying, you're not doing what I expect you to do. Whereas if a coach says, we are going to go out there in the second half and we're going to play stronger, and I'm going to do a better job at watching the transition plays. And, it really makes it's all reframing. It's how you frame things makes the big difference. It creates buy-in and connection. Buy-in is the best way to get effort. That's how you get effort from your kids. Yep. So that's it for effort. Questions on that? Is that pretty? I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. Golden.
Yep. So do you want to just keep going like this? Is this helpful?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the thing too, I'm using you a little bit Kelly, because it's like this thing where, again, not much of it, it's not rocket science and stuff that you hear, from having done it, but it's just really good for me because it's helping me get really excited, even for tonight.
Yeah.
I'm like, it just gives me, it's like I always tell people when they go to a workshop, I'm like, you might not hear anything, but it brings something to the front of your brain. It re-excites you, gives you an idea. So that's kind of the zone I'm in right now, just so you know. I'm absorbing it all.
That's great.
So thank you.
I love it. I know people always say, oh, you're such a good trainer. I'm like, no, I'm not. I've stolen about 50,000 things from other trainers that I've seen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the learning part is, again, the learning and improvement. We focus on improvement. I always joke that, it really should not be the elm tree of mastery. It should be the I'm tree of mastery, because it really makes more sense to say effort, improvement, and mistakes are okay. But elm trees are a lot nicer than I'm trees. So that's why we do it. But I say for this section, we focus on improvement, and improvement comes when you do learn something. So I just put that up right out front. So again, if you feel like you are talking to a partner, Pam, before you do this workshop, and this scenario just doesn't seem to fit, you're always welcome, as you know, to change kind of the words around. The idea behind it is that you have a player, whatever sport they're coaching, and they're not getting any better.
Right.
And you're agreeing with them, and maybe the parents on your back, or the kids like, why aren't I starting? Like, why did I start in the beginning of the season and now you're not playing me? And it all has to do with the performance of the player, and they're not progressing. So how do you handle that? So again, this is always a fun one that you can mix. I think you can mix up coaches with this one, all different ages. This is just a general improvement scenario. So I don't think it has to be sports specific at all. I think it's just good to hear. So, you're talking about learning and improvement. You're talking about this. How do you handle this scenario? Have them share out a couple things. How would they handle this? And then, the idea for this is to question, and the way that it animates, it comes up one at a time. So improvement is rarely a continual steady climb, which we know, one step forward, two steps back. And I remind coaches, because we know this doesn't mean the athletes do. So you have to also, and this is also where I put in my little plug for the millennial generation. We have to remember that the kids we're coaching are trained right now to want instant gratification, more so than we are, more so than our parents ever were. So you're taking a bunch of kids who are so used to having everything handed to them at their fingertips and not struggling a lot, because a lot of their parents are lawnmowing the way for them. So remember that when you're coaching, if you teach a kid a new skill or a new technique and they have a setback for a little bit, that's going to be much more devastating to them. So we have to coach them through how to improve there. And that, to use the power of yet is a great one. Yet is a simple tool that we got from Carol Dweck. Such an easy word. Anytime you find that defeatist attitude in a kid that says, I can't do it, I'm not going to be able to do it. And it's just a tiny little word. And this becomes a culture word on your team. I can't do it yet. No, you can't do that shot yet. You aren't that fast yet, but you will be. Every time a kid says anything negative self-talk, if you follow it up or have your players get in the habit of following up with the word yet, it gives the kids hope, and you're actually creating that growth mindset. You're fostering that growth mindset. So as a coach, think about this. The kid that's not improving, you have to ask yourself a question. Are they giving effort? Okay, so that's the very first question. Well, they're not improving, but are they showing me a lot of effort? If your answer is no, that means that you've got to focus on the effort. Go back to the section we just did and focus on how do we improve the effort. Maybe you need to figure out where their emotional tank level is. Maybe you need to make sure that, are they having problems with a friend on the team? Maybe you need to focus on, are they having fun? Are they enjoying it? Are their parents on their back? So focus on their effort first. Don't worry about the results. Just focus on their effort. So notice it when they do give effort, even if it's when they run over to pick up a bag of balls or they run to get their cleats on. Notice that they're giving max effort, and you'll see more of it. But if the kid's not improving and they are giving maximum effort, that's when you have to rethink your coaching strategy, because there's some reason that what you're trying to communicate to this athlete's not working. And so break down the process, whatever it is that whatever skill or whatever position they're trying to learn. Maybe you need to go back as a coach and break it down and say, okay, their footwork is right, but they're always out of position. Maybe they're not understanding. And I mean, I just use the example, I'm coaching high school lacrosse again. And we lost every defender on all 4 defenders on our team last year. They all graduated. And so we had to start this season. We've got a plethora of midfield and attack players and no defenders. So we have 2 sophomores, a freshman, and 1 junior on defense. The 2 sophomores and the freshmen that we have are great ball players, but they were never defenders. So we've had to create defenders here. So we've been working on and I don't get too much detail, but I just talk about how we've been working on when you go up to play defense on somebody in lacrosse, you want to communicate, like force them to the left, you're going to force them into a double team. So we've been teaching them force left, force right, and let them understand where you are on the field and where to force them into the other player. Well, my coaches and I were sitting there going, why is this one girl not getting it? Like, she's just in the wrong position every single time. And she's a great athlete, giving a ton of effort, but she's like forcing the girl right into the goal. And we're like, what is going on? Well, here, she didn't understand if we meant the player's left or her left. And so she was actually going up, and like when a girl would say force left, she was forcing her the complete opposite direction, and she was cutting off the completely wrong angle. Yep. And it took us like 3 or 4 times of going, why is Allie doing this? Like, she's a good player. Why is she not listening? And we kept saying it over and over again. But she was like, I thought every time they said force left, I thought they meant her left, not my left.
That's classic.
And it was like, like totally changed everything. Yeah. So again, we were wondering why she wasn't getting better, why she kept messing up. And we realized our coaching strategy was not working because she didn't understand where we were coming from. So, and again, the toolkit part, and this is where Carol Dweck's going to talk about in the next video, the toolkit that says avoid saying just keep working. That's something for years that people said, oh, I'm going to foster a growth mindset. I'm just going to say, hey, if at first you don't succeed, try again and keep trying and keep trying. But if a kid is trying, and it also goes back to, you may have read or heard about perfect practice years ago.
I was just going to say, it's the deliberate practice, perfect practice.
Deliberate practice, right, exactly. And I think deliberate practice can go too far the other way, to focusing only on the results. Right. But the idea is that don't just keep praising the kid if they're not doing it right. And that goes back to, again, I like to reference back to Double Goal Coach 1. To fill a kid's tank, we need truthful and specific praise. So don't tell a kid they're doing a good job if they're not. Yep. Tell them what they are doing. Every kid can do something well. So find something they're doing well and praise that, because that's what we want them to be acknowledged for. So the whole like good job when they're not is not what we're looking for. And then Carol Dweck, again, you can give your little spiel about growth mindset. She's a pioneer in the field, expert in the field. I always say like the largest researcher in the field of growth mindset at 4'11", towering at 4'11".
Right.
She's got professional coaches and exactly. She's got professional coaches that are twice her size that are just zeroing in on everything she's saying and sucking it up. So, but I think it's a great video. So that's where she says, the professor who pioneered praising kids for effort says we've missed the point. Her point is just that we've been praising empty effort for way too long. And we've got to really focus in on what effort are we praising and maybe needing to change our coaching strategy. So then this is the goal setting part. And again, this is something that we suggest if you're doing a workshop for high school coaches. I think this is great. In the notes, it suggests that if you're not doing high school coaches, you can skip this part on goals. But I disagree. I mean, I have always done goal setting with my players, even my third graders. And I just think it's important. It doesn't have to be a formal writing down the goal and going back and looking at your little notebook to see if you've achieved it and writing down the steps to achieve it. But I sometimes have just done like something similar, like a winner's circle at the beginning of practice, and said, okay, think of a mistake that you made in the game yesterday or the game last week or practice yesterday. And then think about what you can learn from it. And I can do this with an 8-year-old. And then say, okay, for practice today, what's your goal? What are you going to focus on? And I say, turn to your buddy next to you and tell them what your goal is. And I say, okay, buddy, your job is to keep an eye on them and praise them when they're doing whether it's like, hustling to the ground ball, or if it's swimming and they say, we're not going to breathe in the flag zone, or we're going to work on our flip turns and our breathing, or, in cross country, we're going to keep our pace going up the hill. Whatever it is, any age kid can come up with a goal. So I think it's okay to keep the goals in here, even for the younger kids, but that's just me. But if you need to take something out, this is a suggestion. And again, and I mentioned, even though it's not PCA, I mentioned that there are so many different resources on goals, and they all pretty much say the same thing. So, because I've had coaches ask me, like, don't you guys use SMART goals or, the pyramid of goals? And I always tell them, we don't own the rights to that. So we can't put it out in our workshops and take credit for it. But that's so easy to find. I mean, SMART goals are such a great way to frame it if that's easier for your students. But, PCA can't necessarily take credit for, oh yeah, we're going to teach you how to do SMART goals, because it wasn't our stuff. So I put that out there because I don't want them to say, I'm like, well, wait, I've heard this in goal setting. Why aren't you saying this? But so we just talk about stretch goals and the GPS in terms of goal setting. And again, they're on the sheet also. And if you want a fun activity, I've just done something really simple. If you don't have like 50 coaches in the room, but I've given everybody a sticky note. And I've asked people, like adults, this is fun to do with adults. And I've asked them to just go to a wall, just take a stretch, because this is about halfway through the workshop. And I'll say, I want you to put your sticky note as high on the wall as you possibly can. And they'll all just like stretch up and put it on the wall. And then I'll say, okay, now we're going to talk about stretch goals. And stretch goals are where we found through research that athletes like to be pushed a little bit higher than they're able. And Carol Dweck's done a lot of studies with puzzles and problem solving and found that kids actually choose to be challenged by something when they are given a goal that's a little bit higher than they can rise up into it. So I'll say, okay, now here's what I want you to do. I want all of you to go back to that wall, and I want you to touch the wall higher than that sticky note. And all of them, like, they jump up in the air and they touch higher.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute. I just told all of you to put the sticky note as high as you possibly could.
Yeah.
And now 100% of you just touched higher.
Yeah.
And why? Why is that? And then, somebody will say, well, you challenged us. And sometimes I'll bring like something and I'll just say, yeah, prize goes to, like if I have an extra PCA t-shirt or something, I'll say, okay, prize goes to the person that can reach higher. Who can reach highest than the note? And they'll jump. Like some people will go like a foot higher and they put the sticky note. And I'm like, imagine that, because I challenged you, because I believed in you, because I showed you that I thought you could do it. You all reached higher. And I don't tell them that. They're like, well, you didn't tell us to jump the first time. I'm like, I didn't need to. I told you to put it as high as you could on the wall.
Yeah.
So it's just a fun, silly little activity. But it's funny at the end when you see a person later, like, I remember we did that stretch goals thing. And I'm like, good, glad you remembered it.
Yeah.
It's just a way to remember.
I remember the first time Leslie Grady did that example at TI, I forget how many years ago, but she didn't do and I like the sticky note part. She just did the stand up, reach as high as you can. Right. And the next time, then talk a little bit, and then, okay, now go on your tippy toe. So when I asked to reach high as you can, I didn't, sort of that simple, just visual version, but I like a sticky note.
Yeah. It's so easy.
Because it's classic for kids.
And then I'll say, okay, now.
As hard as you could. Yeah. But,
Yeah.
You
could go higher.
Yeah. Go higher. Great stuff.
And then I say, okay, now take the sticky note down, stick it on your book. And when you go back to your seat, write stretch goals on there. I will mix up some stretch goals.
Yeah.
So they remember it. And then, GPS, it's on their sheet. I just say that's our really easy way of giving kids direction when they're setting goals. So they need a goal, they need a plan, and they need a strategy. And if there's a setback, they need to know that could be part of their plan. Not everything's always going to go perfectly.
Yeah.
So mistakes is the last part. This is my favorite part of all. This is really a great debate to have. So in a preseason meeting, mistakes are essential. You state they're essential for your team. Your assistant coach argues that some mistakes are not okay. So what I do for this, Pam, is I do a value line. So I'll put a line on the floor somewhere or on a wall or whatever it is. And one end is going to be, I want you to think about where you would stand on this statement that mistakes are okay. Mistakes are always okay. So if you think mistakes are always 100% okay, you're going to stand closer to this side. And if you think mistakes are not okay, you're going to stand closer to this side. And so when I tell you to go, I want you to stand somewhere, wherever you believe. If you're somewhere in the middle, I want you to stand in the middle. And I just say go. And they all get up and they kind of move to where they are. And this creates a really great debate. So what I'll do is I'll tell them, okay, when you get there, I want you to talk with the people close to you. And I want you to defend your point. Why do you think mistakes are not okay? Or why do you think mistakes are okay? And sometimes they'll say, well, what kind of mistakes? And I'm like, just mistakes in general. Just take a stand. And then what I'll do is I'll have the farthest person on the side that says mistakes are not okay, and the farthest person on the side that mistakes are okay. And I'll have them each say their point. And then we'll debate. And then I'll say, okay, you guys heard both sides of the argument. Does anybody want to move? Does anybody want to change? And I really try so hard to not put any of my own ideas in there. I'm really just facilitating. Like, oh, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Okay, that's a good point too. And because they'll ask me, like, what about mental mistakes? Well, what about when a kid doesn't understand and I have to tell them 50 times, like repeated mistakes? And I know that's coming up in the workshop. So I just go, okay, yeah, what about that? What do you think? So I think it just creates a little bit of friction and a little bit of, they have to be challenged. They're thinking about it, that all mistakes, because the whole bottom line is that all mistakes are not the same. And most coaches think since mistakes are not the same, we have to treat them differently. And PCA's take on it is all mistakes should be treated the same. They still should be forgiven, and they still should be learning opportunities where they move ahead. The kids should still not be punished for mistakes. Even if it's a mental mistake, they still should not be punished. If it's a repeated mistake, you're not doing something right as a coach. So again, here's the takeaways for this part. After they've discussed and debated and everything else, somebody will bring up mental mistakes, guaranteed. And when they're doing the debate, okay, I heard somebody talk about mental mistakes. What do you think? Why does a kid make a mental mistake? And I just talk them through it. Why would an athlete make a mental mistake? Give me an example of a mental mistake. What would they do? And, you know, when you can facilitate a conversation where they realize, like, wait a minute, if a kid makes a mental mistake, it's maybe because the kids, again, their tank's not full. They're not focused. They don't understand. You didn't communicate well. They're not motivated. Right. Yeah. So isn't that mistake the same as a physical mistake? We want them to flush it. We want them to move on from it. We want their head in the next play. If we beat them up over it, think about if a kid makes a mistake mentally and we're mentally giving them negative consequences, like taking them out of the game or yelling at them or something, where's their brain going to be? Their brain's going to be back on the mistake double fold. So they're going to make more mistakes. So by yelling at a kid to focus, by screaming, focus to a kid, that's actually it's the worst thing you could possibly do, because you're actually taking them out of focus. You're not going to allow their head to clear and move on to the next play.
I've said this for years, and I don't know if I asked at the last TI, but was there ever any talk about bringing Rock King's 4 reasons why mistakes are made back into any workshop? Are you familiar with those?
I'm not. No, I don't know about that.
You know Rock?
Yeah.
Rock? I'm not kidding, probably the first year the PCA started, Rock came and was training me at my school. And he said this thing, 4 reasons why mistakes are made. And Kelly, it stuck. I still, matter of fact, what I say now to people is I go, this used to be in the early days. I remember some of the early slides, you know, like positive coaching, harder to do well. Well, this is, and I would love, since I get to talk to somebody who is in charge here. So, because it's brilliant. Okay. So you ready?
I'm writing them down.
Okay. So, and you will love this. And I see it going back somewhere in the world because of this conversation. And then I'll make sure that I got to jump on with Jake at 1:45. So, but okay. Student who doesn't know what's expected of him or her. The first one is okay. And so then you say, obviously, like, so who owns that? Are we as a coach? Oh, I've told you a million times, or did I tell you once and it was 2 weeks ago? Right. So student athlete doesn't know what's expected of him or her. Am I being clear? You know, again, like you said, was it to the left, my left, or the player's left?
Right.
So I don't know what's expected of me. Student athlete knows what's expected of him or her, but they're not physically capable of doing it.
Okay.
Right? I have gangly arms. You can tell me, Coach Kratz, to cows come home, to plant my foot here and rotate my hip. I'm not physically capable of doing it yet, no matter how many times you tell me.
Right.
My neurons and my hip flexors they're all not working in sync. Student athlete knows what's expected of him or her, but they haven't mastered it yet. Right? So then you can either talk about the Gladwell's 10,000 hours of mastery, the Michael Jordan, I've taken, made 400 game-winning shots. What they don't say is that I've missed 3,700 and blah, 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 right? When you talk about the number of kids, the minimal hours that they have doesn't even come close to whether you ascribe to Gladwell or not, right?
Right. I like
right. Student doesn't know what's expected of him or her. They know what's expected of him or her, but they're not physically capable. They know what's expected of him or her, but they haven't mastered it yet. And the last one is student athlete knows what's expected of him or her, but they're just choosing not to do it. Just to piss you off, right? Here we go. And then the takeaway was, and that's actually the least likely reason, but it's the one that we as coaches think is the most. I've told you a million times, you're just not focused. You don't care. You're just doing it just to piss me off, which is why I'm grabbing my hair. This was, I can spit him off my tongue as if I heard him yesterday, 20 years ago. And I remember I just recently started saying them again in workshop, just because, and I don't have to say PC. And I used to say, this used to be part of ours. It's not, but it makes sense.
Why is it not? Why was it taken out? I
have no idea. I think it's like and I would love to, and I don't know, what's funny is I'd have to go back now and say, did Rock just tell me that? Was that his own anecdote?
Right.
Or was it in part? Now I'm questioning my own self. I thought it was in there, Kelly, but if not, I think it should be. I think it's another great way to have people work at checks and balances of physical, mental, or not, just to get us to go,
Yeah.
Like when I do the one about
what this is. That's right.
Right. When I'm like, oh, Kelly's told me to cradle like this, and I can't because my arms and my shoulders are going wiggity jiggity. When people go like, oh yeah, you're right. Like they can't. They're not physically. They trip over their own.
Yeah.
So anyhow, that's just something that just made me think about it.
That's interesting. Yeah. No, that's great. I'm going to see if we can get that back in. Yeah. I like that. Because that's exactly what this is. It's talking about, it's the same thing. It's the same 4 things. But, the only other key that's in this one that's not mentioned there is, well, I guess it's sort of the same, is that as coaches, we want to tell the athletes to move on after mistakes. What mistakes are not okay anytime ever? And that's, mistakes of disrespect. So if a player is going to go off on an official or go off on a teammate and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, coach. Yeah, I'm going to flush it." We're like, absolutely no. There should be a consequence immediately if a player does that. So just gets down to culture. Yeah. And then I know you have to go. So the next two are just videos. I would pick and choose, which one. The one from Cam I really like because it's live time coaching.
Yeah.
And the one with the keep your eye on the ball is just funny. I don't know why we have them back to back. I usually spread them out, put them somewhere else because I just think it's funny.
It is cute.
But let's see. So then again, okay. So the mistakes of commission and omission, again, it's things people know, but they don't think about it. So would you be upset if a player is trying a left-handed layup for the first time and they miss? As a coach, are we going to reward that or are we going to punish that? Most coaches would say, "Oh, no. If they're trying something new, of course we want to. That's like an aggressive mistake. That's an assertive mistake. We're good." But what if a kid's afraid to ever use his left hand and goes in for the right-handed layup every single time?
Yeah.
Is that going to help them improve? Is that going to make them better? No. So it's just terminology, but we want to encourage assertive mistakes, mistakes of commission, not mistakes of omission, because they're afraid. If you find your athletes are not taking risks and not trying new things, again, reevaluate. Are you or somebody on your coaching staff getting the message through to them that mistakes are not okay?
Help me with this word for a sec. Why am I vegging on? I understand the whole concept. I'm like, omitting. They're omitting what?
It's omission. So they're omitting the action. So it's called. They're just called mistakes of omission because they're
action doesn't exist because they didn't try it.
Yeah.
Okay, got
it. They're tentative. They're afraid. So it's leading to the next one that it's causing. For some reason they have a fear of making the mistake. Yeah. And so fear is causing them to be tentative, and it's a mistake of omission. So the last part is the clearing climate part. This is just awesome. Mary Fry was out there with two of her colleagues this whole weekend. So we were like picking Mary Fry's brain the whole time.
Nice.
And what I love about this is when you first read the quote about the caring climates where everyone involved with the team is treated with kindness and respect. It seems very gushy, like very, kumbaya, warm and friendly. But the cool thing is that what Mary Fry has done in her sport and exercise lab at University of Kansas is, and the video touches on this, I'm going to let you hear from her, is that she takes the reason for creating a caring climate and quantifies it and actually has studied it. Teams, is it linked to performance? Is it linked to less turnovers? Is it linked to stats that you can actually see? And it's fascinating. And she's even gone, and after this too, just to let you know, she's even done studies where she does saliva swabs and measures people's cortisol levels, like the anxiety hormone. And then we'll have coaches yelling and screaming at them when they're trying to learn how to like juggle or something. And then she'll have positive coaches talk to them and actually swab like 2 or 3 times and see the cortisol level go down.
Yeah.
Just by the way they're coached. And not only that, but she'll also see that out of a room of 50 coaches or 50 people, 40 were able to successfully learn to juggle at the end of 10 minutes. And when they were being screamed at by negative coaches, only like 12 were able to juggle at the end of the same 10 minutes. Cool. So it's just cool stuff. It's just really neat. And it kind of makes some of the people like, like they're all like, this is pretty interesting stuff. So again, what are the coaches doing to create a caring climate on their team? And again, it's a cultural thing. And these are all tools that are also on there. Most of these are connected to Double Goal Coach 1. See if they remember the positive, the 5-to-1 ratio. How are you connecting with your athletes? The winner's circle, tank filling, I might just mention that you should have a culture of tank filling, not just from the coaches, but from the players as well. And I also ask coaches a lot to check in with players to see if other players are filling their tanks. Because I had one team where I was being so positive and I didn't realize there were 2 girls on the team that were ripping everybody apart behind my back. And I couldn't figure out why my team was like, I could just tell the girls were not feeling great about themselves. And here I am on the sidelines, like, you're doing a great job. You're awesome. Blah, 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 trying to fill these kids' tanks, not realizing that I had a little person on my team that was sabotaging it for everybody and saying, I'm never going to pass you the ball. You're never going to catch it. And I was like, well, I had no idea. Right. And so a parent brought it up to me and I was like, oh my gosh, how could I be so stupid and not realize this? So again, tools are the end and then the resources. And then that's it. That's the whole workshop.
Yay.
Kelly,
this has been a treat.
Good. Glad you enjoyed it.
No, seriously, I like this workshop. I like the emphasis. And more importantly is going into a workshop tonight You know, coming in my 55 year coming up this August when I was telling somebody, you know, I went out on my own in January. It was just sort of time. I've been with Strive for 7 years. I love doing the work.
Yeah.
I wanted to pick and choose a little more who I was doing, and some of myself was becoming a consultant. And I'm just always talking about too when I do things about growth mindset. You know, you're always just looking for different things to excite you and motivate you. And if you don't, you're like,
yeah.
So I'm more excited to go out and do my workshop tonight.
Good. I'm so glad.
Yeah. So that was great.
Yeah, this is a fun one. It's a fun one. Just be aware of time because it does take a long time.
Well, again, I'm not doing this one, but it just gave me some ideas, even just to stir things up and challenge a couple of different things in the double goal coach. So it just brought some things to the forefront of my brain, which I love and appreciate.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Pam. I appreciate what you're doing.
All right. No. And so do I do anything? You just tell somebody that.
I'm going to tell everybody that you're now certified so they can schedule you up.
All right. Thanks.
All right. You're welcome.
Tell the girls, go Dukes.
I will.
All right. Thanks, Kelly.
Bye.
Bye.